the person that God chose to bring about a new nation that would bring his promised Messiah. And Abraham had faith and he walked with God, but as you see in his life, that there are times where even he got afraid and he didn't trust God and he messed things up. And he had a son named Isaac, who in his old age, and Isaac grew up and he became a father and had twins, Jacob and Esau. But Isaac and his wife Rebekah, they didn't parent very well. They played favorites. Now, you ask any kid that has multiple siblings, they will try to tell you that their parents play favorites too. And it rarely is the one who thinks that they are the favorite. My kids argue about it all the time. And I ask, well, Dad, do you play favorites? And I said, yes, depending on the day. There are some days I like one better than the other, but that's just how life is. But ultimately, I love my children all the same. But Isaac and Rebekah, they had no qualms about who was their favorite. Isaac chose Esau. Rebekah chose Jacob. Jacob was the mama's boy. And Esau was the hunter, the gamer. And Esau wanted to get the birthright because he was the firstborn, even just by a few seconds, because there were competition between Jacob and Esau their whole life. And so one day Isaac sends Esau out to go kill something in the field and then cook it, and he was going to give him his birthright. He was going to give him his blessing. But Rebekah heard it and said, hey, you go cook this animal, kill this animal, and then we're going to fool your father. And that's exactly what they did, even though Isaac was told by God to bless Jacob, not Esau. Isaac was going with his favorite rather than obeying God. So Jacob eventually has to leave home, and he goes to his uncle Laban's. And when he gets to Uncle Laban's, he meets the girl of his dreams. And her name is Rachel. And Rachel is gorgeous. But but Laban has another daughter, and her name is Leah. And Leah's not gorgeous. And the Bible basically says that she's not gorgeous. So Jacob falls in love with Rachel, and he asks Laban, hey, I will work for you for 7 years if I can marry her. So he says, fine. So he works for 7 years on the wedding, goes to the wedding, gets married. Now, I don't know the details of all this, but the morning after they got married, wakes up, and it isn't Rachel, it's the ugly sister Leah. I wonder I wonder if there's one of those. But he was like, hey, that ain't. And he goes, well, in our culture, we make sure the firstborn is married first, so you had to go with it. And he doesn't fight it. He says, all right, what do I got to do to get Rachel? And he says, well, work 7 more years, I'll give you Rachel, but you can marry her now. So he does. So he gets married within a couple weeks, 2 weddings. He's married to 2 sisters. Nothing bad can happen there, can it? Right? So anyway, early on, Leah, the not-so-pretty one, she's getting pregnant left and right. Rachel, the pretty one, she can't get pregnant. And now Leah's, was like not the important one in this culture, having babies meant you were a success. Not having babies as a woman meant you were a failure. So she's rubbing it in on Rachel. She's getting back at Leah this whole time. So finally, Rachel comes up with an idea and says, hey, I have this servant. I can't have babies. Why don't you go sleep with my servant? When she gets pregnant, that'll become my children, and then we can kind of close this gap on competition. Which, can we just say, is a very bad idea. But Jacob doesn't say no. He's like, okay. Now all of a sudden, this servant, she starts having babies, and then Leah stops having babies. So she says, well, I have a servant too. This is in the Bible, y'all. This is why you should read the Bible. There are crazy stories. You're like, how did I get in the Bible? So she has a servant, and she says, well, hey, get with my servant. So she starts having sons too. So now all of a sudden, he's got 10 sons from 3 different women. Some of you are thinking, Jerry, right? Like, this is crazy, right? So then all of a sudden, as she gets older, Rachel finally gets pregnant, and she has this son named Joseph. Now, Jacob, his whole life, he deceived his father. He moved to Laban's house, was deceiving Laban to get ahead in his business. Even when he left Laban's household, he deceived him and swindled him. And he's raising his family in this midst of dysfunction and deceit. And he passes this down to his own sons that we're going to see over the next couple of weeks. But the thing that I want you to see before we jump into all of this, can we just say that this family is dysfunctional? I mean, the more you read it, you're starting to say, boy, they put the fun in dysfunctional. Some of you are coming here today and you would describe your family as dysfunctional. Well, it can't hold a candle to Isaac, Jacob, and Esau, and Jacob's sons. But here's the thing. This is the family that would bring about the Messiah. So as we start into Genesis 37 to 50, I want you to see this principle. God does not use perfect people to bring about his perfect plan. You might be here thinking this morning, Pastor Joe, you're here about to talk about a dysfunctional family today. Well, guess what? I come from one. And that's okay. It doesn't matter where you came from that will keep God from taking you where you need to go. And here's the thing. Some of you know you have a dysfunctional family. Some of you came from a good family, but has a lot of dysfunction in it. And some of you are just in denial because everything looks good on the outside, but deep down you know y'all are dysfunctional too. So today, whether you're in any of those categories, and let me just be honest, I love my family, but boy, we have dysfunction that shows up sometimes too. So how do I function in the middle of my dysfunction? How do I learn to function in the middle of all my dysfunction? Because what ends up happening is if you come from a dysfunctional family, most people will say, well, you know what? My family, they're nuts. You're crazy. And you know what? Just about everybody's family is a little bit crazy. At least they have some crazy people in it. But in the midst of all that, how we respond to that dysfunction is what makes all the difference. You didn't get to choose your family. You didn't get to pick, but you can choose how you respond moving forward. And that's what I want to help you. That's what I want to teach you today. See, some of you came from a rough childhood, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. And you can be the victim to what happened to you, or you can let God lead you out of it. But I can tell you today, anybody that decides to be a victim will never get to experience what God has to offer. But if you will look to God, because here's what happens in the middle of dysfunction. We begin in the middle of our dysfunction because there are people that aren't leading us right. There are people that aren't parenting us right. And so we had to figure it out for ourselves. So we learned to trust ourselves. We developed coping mechanisms to help us to get through what we're going through because there was a lot of crazy all around us. But what I want to help some of us this morning, and some of you desperately need to hear this, you can't change your past, but you can change your attitude about your past. You don't have to be the victim anymore. I tell this to people all the time that come to me, say, Pastor, can you help me with this? And you counsel me through this? I say, sure. And they'll talk. And what happened to them was truly terrible. And I said, boy, what happened to you is awful. You really are a victim of this. And so can I ask you a question? You're like, sure. I was like, how much longer do you want to be the victim? What do you mean? I was like, well, how much longer do you want to play the victim? Well, I've been the victim my whole life. Why would I change now? I said, well, let's do this. Why don't you pull out your phone and let's set a date for when you're going to stop wanting to be the victim. And it's at that point people are like, I don't like you very much. But I'm telling you the point that if they're ever going to, they can't change your past, but what we can do is change our attitude about the past. And when we change our attitude about the past, You see, there are a lot of terrible things that happen to you, and we're going to talk about those and we're going to address those. But can I just tell you, it's of the mercies of God that he brought you through those things. And that God has a plan and God has a purpose for your life, and he didn't give up on you, and he came with you through it, and he's there today to show you his grace and his mercy. And he says, I've got something for you, but you can't keep focusing on your past. Look to me now and let me change you. Let me change your attitude. You can't change your past, but I would also say this: you can change your future by allowing God to make you the person that he intends for you to be. God didn't make happen what happened to you in your past. He allowed some of those things, but he's going to take those things that other people meant to destroy your life, and he can help use them to develop your life. You can change your future if you'll allow God to do what he wants to do in your life. So, what exactly then is a dysfunctional family? Some of you are thinking, well, that's easy. That's my family. But I want to talk about really, what is a dysfunctional family? How do you know what a dysfunctional family is? Here it is. Here's kind of a technical term. A dysfunctional family is one in which improper and immature behavior of at least one parent damages the growth and health of family members. Some of you say, well, that's definitely my family. But dysfunction can show up. It spreads like a virus, but it can show up in different ways. Go ahead and go to the next slide real quick, and let's talk about some of these things where dysfunction, because some of them are major, and some of them can seem minor, but they have, in many cases, equal results. The first one that we all think about is abuse, of course, whether it be physical abuse, mental abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, that if you had that happen in your family line, one of the craziest things is people that were abused often abuse other people because they don't know how to do it any differently. Then others come from bitterness that they didn't like what happened to them, so they passed it down to their kids, and out of their bitter spirit, they raise bitter kids. Then there's chaos. You never know what you're going to get. Every day is a guess. Every day is a wondering. You don't know if mom's coming home. You don't know if dad's going to show up. Everything is total and complete chaos. Another thing that is marked by dysfunction is control. You see, maybe everything looks good on the outside in your family, but you had a parent that had to make sure everything was under their control. And if you didn't do it the way that they said that you ought to do it, there was hell to pay. Then there's deceit. We're going to see this in this family a lot. Like, lying is just a way to get through, to deal with some of the things that you're dealing with. This is no big deal. It's just how you get your own needs met. And then there's denial. Everybody thinks that, well, it's not really as bad as it really is. You live in a family that has a bunch of lumps in their carpet because they're always sweeping things under the rug. Then you're going to see another one, favoritism. Favoritism. And we're going to talk a lot about that a little bit this week, but a lot next week, so I hope you come back to that. Then there's inconsistency. One day it's yes, the next day it's no. One day it's good, the next day it's bad. You just don't know what you're going to get. Then there's indifference. Sometimes there's nobody cares. Just do your thing. And in the moment, as you're a kid and you're thinking, yeah, this is great. Now you're an adult and you're like, man, I'm messed up. Then there's instability. Similar to inconsistency, but like you never have a strong foot to stand on because every time you start to put it, something bad happens, something gives out beneath you. Then there's jealousy, there's envy. One is envious of the other and a family member or somebody else, and it wrecks a family from the inside out. There's shame. Unfortunately, I see a lot of this in Christian families. They come to church every Sunday, they look good, but they operate off of living with each other with guilt trips. Well, if you really love Jesus, you wouldn't have done that. And they use the Bible, and they use God, and they use Jesus to shame the person. You know one of the names that God gives the devil? The accuser of the brethren. When you use shame and guilt to get people to do what you want, you're not like Jesus, you're like the devil. And then there's unpredictability. You just don't know. You just don't know what you're going to get. And so when we live in an environment like this, we know we can't trust those around us, so we trust ourselves. And for many of our lives, we just learned I can't count on anybody else, but I know that I can count on me. Even though I let me down a good bit of time, I know that I'm more consistent than the people that are around me. And as I talked about this the last few minutes, some of you are thinking, that's my life. Well, I have hope for you today because we're going to see a family of dysfunction and how God used Joseph to come through it and to be all that God wanted him to be. So let's go there. Genesis chapter 37, Genesis 37. And Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. So the land of promise, he's living there. This is Jacob. Jacob is the father, all right? Everybody got that? Let's go to verse 2. And these are the generations of Jacob. Now he's got a lot of sons, but he's letting us know right at the bat who the favorite one is. Joseph being 17 years old. Does anybody know what it's like to be 17? Does anybody know what it's like to have a kid that's 17? Right? Okay, I got one right now, right? Like, they love having conversations. They think they know a whole lot better than you do. They're pretty funny. They're annoying sometimes. Man, he's ready for a microphone right now. We just have a good time together. Like we love hanging out. We love doing some things. But listen, Max has some definite opinions as a 17-year-old. And as what you're going to see, Joseph is 17, and he's the favorite we're going to see in just a second. And he has opinions about the way the life goes. And so Joseph being 17 years old, why 17 years old? He's the youngest. Later on, Benjamin will come along, but he's the oldest of Rachel, the favorite wife. It says, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren. You're going to see this is a big deal in a minute. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah. Then go on to the next part. And the sons of Zilpah. Those are the names of the two servants that Rachel and Leah got. Those are the names of those ones. So all the sons, they're all feeding sheep. They're all shepherds, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. So a couple things you see here. What is Joseph, the 17-year-old, doing bringing a bad report to Jacob? A couple of things. How many, when you grew up, your older sibling was kind of the boss when parents weren't around? All right, you know what I'm talking about? How many did the youngest one ever try to be the boss? How did that go? It didn't. Well, you have to understand, by the time Joseph is born, all of Jacob's other sons are grown adult men. And so when Joseph gets old enough, probably after he's 12, 13, when he became a man in this culture, he was being trained to take over his father's business. And so in order to do that, he would have to become the supervisor. So he was becoming the supervisor at 17 over all his older brothers. Can anybody see how that could go wrong? How would you do if your younger sibling goes, I'm the boss now? Well, I'd have been like, yeah, forget it. That's not happening. But so then, second on top of that, he brought an evil report to his father. He tattletaled. You know, snitches get stitches and end up in ditches. Because that's what's going to happen. This is what happens. Rats get whacked, right? So then look at verse 3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children. Not good, man. He didn't even hide it. Look at this. because he was the son of his old age. Because you know what it is. You remember when you were a young parent, everything was a big deal? Now, when you get to be a little bit older, it's like, it's not that big of a deal. There's some things, it's like, it's not that big of a deal. Well, he's kind of an old man yet. He's kind of made a lot of mistakes as a father. He knows it. Everybody knows it. His sons know it. He's definitely not been a great husband. But then he still doesn't learn from a lot of them because he does this incredibly stupid thing, and he made him a coat of many colors. So not only did he not hide his favoritism, he sought to show his favoritism. He bought him a coat. This coat, see, in those days, if you wore a coat out there, they had the sleeves that were cut off because you were meant to work. This coat would have had long sleeves. It was made of fine material. It was the nicest of the nice things that you could get, and he was giving it to him, and it was to let not only Joseph know how much he was loved and favored, but it also let all the brothers know, you are not as important as Joseph. So, can we just all agree that Jacob's a pretty cruddy father? All right, look at verse 4. And when his brethren saw, it wasn't even trying to be hidden. When they saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him. They hated Jacob? Jacob did all this stupid stuff, but who did they hate? What in the world, man? Joseph just lived. He put on this coat, but they hated Joseph. And notice this, and could not speak peaceably unto him. Does it remind y'all of some of your Christmas? And he could not, I can't even be in the room with this guy. And Joseph didn't do anything. He just, thanks for the coat, Dad. He saw something that wasn't good for the family business, so he said, hey, Dad, there's this bad report. And the more that he does, the more they hate him. Then look at verse 5. And Joseph dreamed a dream. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it to his brethren. So Dad plays favorites. Dad buys him coat. Dad makes him supervisor. Hate is growing. They can't even speak to him. Can't even be in the same room with them anymore. And then he says, hey guys, last night I had a dream. Let me tell you my dream. And when he told them the dream, they hated him even more. It's like a snowball of hate. They hate him yet the more. Then look at this. And he said unto them, hear I pray you this dream which I have dreamed. Now Joseph is one of those guys that doesn't make a lot of mistakes. When you read it, in fact, Joe, can we just say that most Josephs don't make a lot of mistakes in life? You know what I'm saying? Right. Sorry. Joseph just doesn't make a lot of mistakes, but here's an issue that some Joes have, and especially this Joe. The inability to read a room. Joseph does not understand how much his brothers hate him. And so he wakes up one morning, hey guys, I got a dream for you. You want to hear it? Right? And so he's like, hey, here's the dream which I've dreamed. And of all the mistakes that Joseph's made, he has the inability to read a room. And it probably comes because he's 17 years old. But let me give you a principle here. Did Joseph make a mistake in telling the dream? I don't know. But here's what we do know. That the dreams that he's about to give are prophetic and they came from God. Now, he may have sought to be saying the right thing at the wrong time because of where his brothers were. But let me help you just a principle that I gleaned from this in my own personal Bible study, and that is this. Godly wisdom knows what to share and when to share it. Some of us, we have valuable truths that God wants us to share, but if you share them at the wrong time, it actually pushes people further away from God than drawing them closer. That's why you need the trust in God. That's why you need the leading of God to show you what to say and also when to say it. Because if you say the right thing at the wrong time, it's still the wrong thing. So then he goes in verse 7. For behold, look, we're binding sheaves in the field. I was binding sheaves, you were binding sheaves, and lo, my sheaf arose. So it stood up. and also stood upright. So I was like, And behold, your sheaves, they stood round about and made obeisance to my sheaf. All your sheaves bowed down to me. Well, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. So they already hate them. And then all of a sudden they get this dream where Joseph is standing up and they're all bowing down to them. This is not what happens where the brothers go, man, we hated you before, but we love you so much more now. Look at verse 8. And his brethren said to him, shall thou indeed reign over us? Yes, actually, he will. Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? Yes, he will. And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. They're like, they couldn't speak peaceably to him. Their hate is growing. Now it grows even more. Can I just tell you, if God puts something on you and it's from God, you don't always have to share it right away. Let God do the work in you before you bring it out. Now, Joseph may have been doing this. We don't know. But I'm just saying his brothers weren't ready to hear it, which is obvious because of the dysfunction in their family. But then look at verse 9. And he dreamed yet another dream. This is what's interesting about this. There are three things that got Joseph in trouble, but one of those things comes from the same thing. So the first thing that got Joseph in trouble was he got a gift from his father Jacob, a coat, which showed his favoritism. That got him in trouble. The second thing that got him in trouble was a gift from his heavenly Father, the ability to interpret dreams. All he's doing is like, hey guys, I got a dream. This is what I think it means. And they're like, oh, I hate him. But both gifts got him in trouble. I just found that interesting. And yet another dream, and told it to his brother and said, behold, I have dreamed a dream more. I've dreamed another dream. And all the guys are like, yippee, tell us. And behold, the sun and moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. So the sun, the moon, and the stars, they all bow down to me. And then look at verse 10. This is amazing. And he told it to his father, you know, the one who loves him the best, and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him. Jacob goes, now, Joseph, you've gone a little too far this time, son. I know I've given you a lot of leeway. I know I've given you a lot of things. Do you think I'm ever going to bow down to you? He rebuked him. He says, what is this dream that thou hast dreamed? And then look at the rest of verse 10. Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee, to the earth? And the answer is, yes, you will. Not now, but one day. Spoiler alert. Verse 11. And his brethren envied him. They were jealous of him. But his father observed the saying. He's like, that's interesting. And because he's my favorite son, I'm not going to push it aside. Yes, I don't plan on ever bowing down to him, but I'm just going to observe this. I'm going to meditate on this. So can we just all agree in the first 11 verses, we have a really dysfunctional family? And here's what you're going to learn, is God's going to do an amazing work in Joseph to bring him out of this family of dysfunction. Let me challenge you over the next few weeks as we study this to read Genesis 37 to 50 in your own personal devotions. And one of the things that you're going to find is the secret to Joseph's success in coming from his family dysfunction. And that was this: the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord, from the very beginning, the Lord was with Joseph. And here's what you're going to find as a byproduct: Joseph was with the Lord. So, how can we take all of this and apply it to our lives? And especially if you feel like today that you're the victim of what happened to you as a child, and you are. I'm not trying to take that away from you. But how do you move forward because of what's happened in your past? And this is the point I want you to see today, and that is God can help me function in the middle of my family dysfunction. That you can't get through what happened to you on your own, but God can help you. God can bring you through. I don't care how dysfunctional your family was. I don't care how awful it was. God can take you from where you are to where you need to go. So the question that I want to ask you then is this: how does God help me move from dysfunctional to functional? And I want to give you characteristics of strong families and pairing them with characteristics of dysfunctional families. The first one is this: strong families depend on God to meet their needs. Strong families depend on God to meet their needs. The opposite is true is this: dysfunctional families depend on self and others to meet their needs. So strong families look to God to meet their needs, but here's what happens in dysfunctional families. And it could be overtly dysfunctional or covertly dysfunctional. What I mean by that is this: for some of you, overtly dysfunctional families, man, you've seen the maneuvering, you've seen the manipulating, you've seen how people didn't even try to hide that they were just using you to get what they wanted. They were using whatever situation they were trying to control. They were trying to lie. They were trying to frame whatever they needed to frame because they were depending on themselves, and they would use others just to meet their own needs. There is no happy family where everybody is meeting their own needs. Those are miserable families. Those are families on a ticking time bomb. But strong families don't look to other people to meet their needs. They look to God to meet their needs, and they trust that God will speak to the people that will love them, and God will work through them to show love to me. But ultimately, I look to God to show love to me. I trust God that God will use Heather to love me. I trust God that God will use my children will love me. But I am trusting God that He will help me to love Heather, that He will help me to love Mackenzie, Ainsley, and Max. I'm trusting God that He will help me to love each one of you. Because strong families depend on God to love one another. And some of you, you've been depending on yourself your whole life. And you've gotten pretty good at it. In fact, I would say you're a good dad. You're a good mom. You're a good spouse. You're a good friend. You're a good employee, even in your own dependence. But can I tell you, you don't even know the half of how good you could be if you'll let God take control. Because here's what happens when you rely on self. Eventually there's going to come a day when self runs out and self doesn't work. And that dysfunction will come to the forefront. So every family, and we all need to understand this, every family will have their difficulties, disagreements, and differences. Here's the thing: strong families and dysfunctional families all have difficulties. Just don't think when I started following Jesus, I've never had difficulties ever again. Or disagreements. I've had disagreements with all three of them this week. And they've had disagreements with me. And I've just learned I'm wrong every time. I'm just wrong. And we all have differences of opinion. This is the way I think it should look. This is the way you think it should look. And we just all disagree sometimes. Every family goes through that. But when we trust in God, that doesn't push people away. You see, for a lot of people, whenever any form of difficulty, disagreement, or difference takes place, we run. Strong families don't have to run. Here's what strong families do. Strong families learn to connect with each other when difficulties and disagreements take place. See, when we develop coping mechanisms when we're trusting in ourselves to protect ourselves. So we don't want to become vulnerable. And so we develop things that cause, when disagreements and difficulties, we push even those we love away. We don't even know that we do it. But instead of drawing people in, strong families connect. They draw people in. Dysfunctional families, I want you to see the other way. Dysfunctional families push each other away and give up on each other when difficulties and disagreements take place. So when things go bad, when things don't go the way that I think that they should, a dysfunctional family says, "Get away from me." But what strong families do is this: we're going to get through this together, and the way that we're going to get through this is not me pushing you away and you pushing me away, but we're going to come together and figure this out together. And the only way you have that kind of unity is in the bond of the Holy Spirit and the unity of peace. And that's why connection is so powerful in relationships, is that even when things go a little bit wrong, even when things aren't right, you lean on one another to fix it, not push each other away. Then the third thing is this: strong families communicate effectively with each other. Strong families have great conversations. Strong families encourage one another. Strong families uplift one another. Strong families listen to people's weakest moments and don't get rid of them. Don't give up on them. But dysfunctional families communicate poorly with each other. They say the least that needs to be said to get what they need and what they want. You see, when life is lived with self, that's not family, that's partnerships. Because a partnership is only in it to get what they can get out of the other partners. But families love each other to show love to them unconditionally, to give them love, acceptance, and worth, which is what we all want. But for a lot of us, we learned to get love, acceptance, and worth from people that were trying to love themselves and get acceptance for themselves and worth from themselves. So you learn to get love, acceptance, and worth. And the harder you're trying, you may not be doing the same things that person in your dysfunctional family did, but if you don't change the ways, you're doomed to repeat them. You may not do the exact same thing, but you'll still do things that will cause you to end up in the same place. So, there are going to be disagreements. There's going to be misunderstandings. There's going to be mistakes. But here's the thing about strong families. When misunderstandings happen, forgiveness happens. Oh, you thought this, I thought this. I was way off. Would you please forgive me? You know, I still talk to people all the time, and I hear this way more than I should. I hear spouses saying this about spouses. I hear kids saying this about parents. I hear parents saying this about kids. You know, in all the years of our relationship, I've never heard them say, I'm sorry. I've never heard them say, please forgive me. If that's you this morning, the first thing you need to do when we close is you need to repent. Because you're so full of yourself, you can't see yourself. If you can't say, I'm sorry to your kids, there's something wrong. If you can't say sorry to your spouse, there's something wrong. If you can't say sorry when you've done wrong, there's something wrong. I'm not trying to shame you. I'm not trying to guilt you, because it's actually a thing where God is coming to you this morning and he's saying, hey, you're full of yourself. Let me empty you of you so I can fill you with me. And what happens is this: there are going to be misunderstandings in relationships. You don't have to push away. You don't have to call them names. You don't have to label them. You just seek forgiveness. And then when mistakes happen, you're going to give each other the benefit of the doubt. Now, mistakes are unintentional. But we all know there's a lot of people that do intentional stuff, right? Well, that's a different sermon for another day. But sometimes what happens is we're so used to things being done intentionally that when somebody does something unintentionally, we treat them the same way as somebody that did something intentionally. And so what we do, instead of giving the benefit of the doubt, we assume the worst rather than believe the best. So, let's close all of this up and then I'm done. I can break my dysfunctional chains when I embrace God's functional freedom. If you've not learned to trust in God, you don't know what real freedom looks like. And I don't care if you live in the United States of America. There's a level of freedom that you're missing without an active, vibrant relationship and fellowship with God. And if you don't have a relationship with God, here's what I want you to do. You come find me after the service. Let's set up an appointment. And maybe you do have a relationship with God, but you've kind of wandered away from God and you don't have active fellowship with God. Boy, same thing. Reach out. Let somebody help you figure out what your next steps are. How do you get from where you are to where God wants you to go? Because here's the thing. Dysfunction can go from person to person. It can go from generation to generation. And I know many of you, you've come from generational dysfunction. And here's the thing that some of you are thinking right now. I want it to end with me. To which I say, thank you. Somebody's got to do it. My great-grandmother did it in my family. 5 generations later, she decided enough is enough. And I promise you, if some of you say, it ends with me, then in 5 generations, there'll be somebody up, standing up front like this going, I'm so thankful for her. I'm so thankful for him. They had to go through a whole lot of hard times, but they broke that dysfunction in our family. God can give you that. God has the power to help you get through your dysfunctional chains. And even though they're weighing you down this morning, what I'm telling you is you don't have to carry them anymore. You can give them to God and learn to live in the rest and the freedom that He has provided. So I want to ask you this question. I want to give you a chance for you to dream a little bit. What would your family look like if you let God change you? You can't change anybody else. Anybody ever tried? It didn't go well. But if you'll let God change you, it'll change the dynamic of the relationship. So, you want to be that chain breaker? You want to be that, you want to break that dysfunction that's going from generation to generation? It can start with you if you let God take control. Because God can help me function in the middle of my family dysfunction. And what He will do in your life, if you'll allow Him, will be some of the greatest things you've ever experienced in your life, no matter your past. Let's pray. Lord, thank you today. Thank you for this family. Lord, I'm so glad that there are not chapters in Scripture written about my life.